oedden ni'n mynd i tu nain i tan rall, yn eitha rheolaidd, a mae yna gamfa hir iawn ar y ffordd i dan rall, a mae fydda'n chwaer a fi yn mynd i fyny. Ac wrth fynd i fyny, fydda'n un yn eistedd ar un strut, a llall uwchben yn trafod be oedden ni'n mynd i gael i ginio. Weithiau fydda nain neu Antilet wedi bod yn coginio ac yn gwneud rhyw gecs a rhyw cream horns, a dyn oedden ni'n gobeithio bod yna cream horns i de. A mi fydda taid bob amser ar ôl amser cinio yn mynd eista o dan y cloc mawr, ac oedden ni'n gwybod bysa fo'n mynd i gysgu ac i chwrnu. A wedyn ar bnawn dydd Sadwrn, nad oedd o ddim yn betio rhywbeth a fel o, ond ar bnawn dydd Sadwrn, oedd o'n licio mynd i'r parlwr a sbio ar y teledu pai a sbio ar y rasio a gweld y cyffylau yn mynd o gwmpas i drio deud pa rif fysa'n ennill. Oedd gynno fo bleser mawr efo hynny. A dyn fydda fo'n mynd i fyny i'r ffryddoedd ar ei geffil dic i hel y gwartheg i lawr a defaid hefyd. Ond oedd taid efo cob go iawn yn mynd i fyny'r mynydd. Ac mi gath o hyd i gasag wedi marw a ciw. Oedd y ciw wedi dod yn ddiweddar iawn. Ac mi ddoth yr ciw i lawr i tan rall. A Lwlw oedd enw honno. Dwi'n ni modri Antilet o roed yr enwau. Mynd i tu nain, a fydda ni eisiau mynd i be oedden nhw'n alw'n Daffodil Mountain, i fyny topia. A mae'r cennin Pedr yna yn rhai, dydyn nhw'n mi gael yn un llall fel dwi'n dall. A fydda nain yn dweud, da chi ddim i ddod a dim un bulb o'na. Oedd na siars, da ni'n mynd i hel. Ac oedden ni bron yn crynu, os o gynna ni, oedden ni'n cuddiad, achos oedden hi'n strict, oedd hi'n hynod o strict, oedden nhw fod i cael ei gadael yno. Oedden ni'n rhoi rhyw bocad, gan obeithio nad o'n nain ddim yn mynd i chwilio. Mi oedd na gymeriad yn byw o dan nain a taid, Tom Llwynon, Thomas Davies oedd o, ond oedden ni byth yn galw o Mr Davies. Tom oedden ni'n galw o, achos pan oedden ni'n byw yn Rock House, oedden ni'n mynd ar draws y coed, ar draws y cyag i lawr, achos gynno fo, be oedden nhw'n alw y Cherry Farm. Dyn oedd gynno fo geirios yno, dyn oedden ni'n mynd lawr yna, fydda fo yno yn trio cael yr piogod ar y jes, fel bod nhw ddim yn bita'r ceirios. O gynno fo beiriant clwad, a fydda fo'n mynd i capal a fydda'r peiriant clwad ma'n gwychian. Oedd pawb yn gwybod na Tom oedd wrthi. A fydda fo'n dweud, os ydych chi'n mynd i weld o'i drafod be oedd yn y Cymro, fydda fo'n dweud, ysdi be, chlywys i ufflwn o ddim byd ar y gwneudog na. A dyn hefyd, be oedd o'n neud, oedd o'n cnoed baco. Oedd, baco dy. A dyn, pam oedd o'n dod, wel, mae'n siŵr bod o'n gwneud, ond lle bynnag oedd o'n byw da. Ond fydda fo yn cnoi'r tobaco dy yma. Fydda yna allan am y grat. A fydda fo byth oedd y grat yn ddi, de. Ond mi oedd o'n cnoi. Dyna'r unig un welis i yn cnoi tobaco dy. Wel, o gynna ni ddim cael chwarae. A wedyn, os oedden ni'n chwarae rounders, oedden ni wrth y tŷ gwyn yn fanno, ac oedd o'n number 1, number 2, number 3 oedd y telephone box. A dyn, un o postia giatia y gorlan oedd number 4. A dyn yn aml iawn, mi fydda yna ffenas rhywun yn cael peltan efo'r bel. Pan oedden ni'n blant, mae yna res fyny'n top pentra a cael ei galw yn Rose Girl Cottage. Swn i ddeud na Mancunian way oedden ni'n galw fo pan oedden ni'n blant. Oeddech chi'n gallu gwneud efo nhw, ac oedden nhw'n bobl clenia fyw.
From my perspective, it was the 1970s when there was a lot more about self-sufficiency and, growing more of your own stuff. And I wanted to live in the country anyway. And John had grown up with an uncle who had an acre of land and kept livestock, so he wanted to do that sort of thing more.
But it was great when we had the sheep because I knew all of them. I knew that there's one with a white line down its nose, and there was the wild one, and there was the one that I had to treat for out of white disease, something in the eyes. And after she was very tame, and I would sit by her when she was in lamb, in the field, just stroking her belly, feeling the lamb, and she'd be there half an hour.
And then, of course, you find once you've got any livestock, you have to spend all your time getting the fences sorted. So that all took precedence over the house. One of our goats jumped out, because they escape all the time, goats, but it jumped over a barbed wire fence and got a nasty scratch in its udder, and that half of its udder never healed. So we never had quite enough milk in the winter. And then in the summer there'd be a spell of a few weeks we'd have too much. And I'd make cheese, and I made a bit of butter once and get to the hang of it, and then you wouldn't have enough milk. So we had to buy milk in the winter.
And we had geese, and I went down one day to look at the geese, and there was an egg just about to crack. And Mum wasn't doing much about it, so I took the egg out and broke it. And the first thing that Gosling saw was me. He was really tame after that. He'd come up to me, I was building a conservatory at the time, and he'd come up and do that to my trouser leg, just that. Right, I'll stroke him. Right, I'm going in for panad now, you go back to the missus, and he'd trot off. And when I came out again, he'd come out again. If I was sitting in the field, he'd come and up behind me. You'd just hold him like that.
I think I thought that we could live quite cheaply and that we'd be growing all our own food and stuff like that, maybe making a bit of money. What I found was that the girls were getting bigger, and teenagers eat quite a lot, and they don't necessarily eat the sort of veg and things that you want to grow. Because lots of the stuff you can grow is greens, and cabbage and all those sort of things. So I was actually spending more and more on food. And we found with the lambs, the first year John took them to the slaughterhouse, we didn't have to pay because the value of the skins covered the cost of the slaughter. Then every year it went up, and it perhaps doubled. The prices of everything kept going up. And I think the price we were selling the lambs out stayed. We would find out, or John would find out what the butchers were charging. We'd sell them at that price, but that seemed to stay more or less the same.
Small holdings like that, you don't own it. You look after it. You do your best to it. It looks after you. And you hope to pass it on in at least as good condition anyway. And that's really satisfying. In those days, I used to help the farmer next door. It's a sort of apprenticeship, really. Oh, John, are you busy tonight? Well, I had lots of things to do. No, I thought I'd be over. So I'd trot across the fields, and it might be carrying bales. In those days, the sheep would be driven up to the mountain in the spring and brought down in the autumn on foot, and I'd be behind them, and their bottoms would be going this. And you see this white stream going down the road. And they don't do that now. And there was a farmer called Gwilym TD, because he lived in TD, and he had a very squeaky voice like this. And he was lovely. He used to drive his little Fergie back. No roll bar, nothing really, just a little grey Fergie back. And he was always so friendly. Perhaps because we kept sheep, everybody around us, all the local people, were very helpful and kind. I've had nothing but help and kindness from everybody, and that's been a pleasure. I've lived here more than half my life. I'm binational. This is my Cynefin. This is where I belong. It's where I put my roots down. It's where I feel at home. It's a religious experience to sit on the side of Califern or Moel Shabod or something like that and just look at the sky and the dome of heaven, and there's the sheep.
Wedi cael y magu yn Talabont, yn fferm fynyddig Carreg y Ffordd. Wel, oedd gynnu ni ddefaid a gwarthag, a wedyn doedd gynnu ni'n trydan,
o'n i wedi priodi cyn i ni gael trydan ar y ffarm, wedyn lampa oil ac cofio ladin lamps, wedyn eisiau pwmpio hein i fyny, wedyn bob un o hyn oedd y lampa mynd lawr, a wedyn eisiau ail pwmpio nhw fyny ar y beth, a felly Canwy lle fydd ni'n gwely, de, i uwchan. Mi oedd bobl eraill trydan, jyst bod ni'n byw rhyw uchal i fyny, dwi'n cofio ni, oedd hi'n cael eisiau cario dŵr o'r ffynnon, ac yna ac o'na andros o all i cario dŵr wedyn. Oedd yn rodyr rhan amla mynd lawr i nôl y dŵr ma o'r ffynnon a cario dau bwcedad i fyny. Nhw'n gorfod parech i wedyn drwy'r dydd. Lle oedden ni, y cae, lle oedden ni nôl y dŵr, cae nôl dŵr oedd enw'r cae yna. A wedyn oedd hwnna mynd yn llawn o friallu a bethau, da chi'n gwybod, yn y gwan hynny. Ac o gynna ni geffil, a gyna wrth gwrs trol a cheffil o gynna'n dechrau, ond wedyn o gynna ni, dwi'n cofio rhyw geffil brith mawr gynna ni, gym, a wedyn o gynna bobl yn byw yn y tyddyn bach drws nesaf, gynna nhw geffil diwc, oedden nhw'n poni bach oedd nhw du, lle. Wedyn oedd y rogan drws nesa'n cael mynd ar gefn gym, oedd hi'n hyn a fi, a fi'n ar gefn diwc, a wedyn oedden ni'n mynd i fyny am eigi ar gefn y cyffylau yma, oedd gym yn medru mynd ar dipyn o speed yn dod yn geffil bach mae'n mynd tu ôl iddo i fyny at Lleisiau'r ac ar draws a dod lawr ffordd arall, a chi'n mynd fyny un ffordd a llawr ffordd arall. A wedyn dynodi arbennig dwi'n gofio di dwi'n o cneifio, oedd o'n llwyth o bobl yn dod, 20 o ddynion yn dod i helpu gneifio, swapio de. Dim talu fath yma nhw rwan i bobl dod i gneifio. Chi'n cael 20 o wahanol ffermydd, chi dod i helpu gilydd ac oedd o'n andros amser braf. Fydden nhw'n mynd i fyny i mewn bell o Lleisiau'r, ond dewna, ac yna tua 2-3 llon trailer o ddynion yn cael eu cario i fyny i helpu de. A chi'n clywed nhw'n canu ac yn beth ar y ffordd i fyny, nhw'n eitha modd yn cael mynd i edrych arnyn nhw'n mynd i fyny ac yn dod lawr wedyn gyda'r nos. Ble myna oedd yn weithio neu rhyw ganeuon oedd yn digwydd bod yn boblogaidd ar y pryd rhyw ganeuon Cymraeg, felly ganeuon os yn lawan de chi fatha Triod y Buarth neu beth felly, rhyw ganeuon hwyliog i. Gwaith i fel bod yna gymaint o bobl ystalwm yn byw yn y topyn a dwi'n cofio tŷ Bryn Gwenith, dwi'n cofio hwnnw, a dwi'n cofio tŷ Pyllu. Maen nhw wedi tynnu nhw i gyd i lawr, oedden ni'n mynd i'r tai ma, ac oedden ni'n sgwennu'r y walia, mynd i fyny grisia, bethau felly, ond fel oedd y blynyddoedd yn pasio, oedd yr tai ma'n dirywio, de, chi, ac un o'r llefydd oedden ni'n hoffi, oedd fyny yna capal swar, ystalwm, yn wag, ond oedden ni'n mynd i capal swar, a mal arno Sul am dro, gryw plant, ni fel plant, felly, wedyn oedden ni'n, o'na rhyw lyfrau hymns a beth yna, wedyn oedden ni'n cael rhyw chwyl, de, chi, cael chwarae capal oedden ni, oedden ni'n, de.
Our cottage, Lleisiau'r, was a typical Welsh long cottage. It was made up of 2 cottages actually, and there was a third one at the end, which was a holiday home belonging to a lady called Miss Tongue, and she was a teacher from Birmingham. So we had 2 of the cottages. They were 2-roomed cottages with a little crogloft bedroom above. I was 10 before drains were put in the village. So before that, we had an outside toilet halfway up the garden. They were septic toilets that you put disinfectant in. I'm not sure whether we grew very good rhubarb with whatever was in these toilets. I do remember my mum had a lovely cottage garden at the top where she grew all her fruit and veg. We then had no bathroom, so we had an old tin bath that my mum would have to fill. No central heating or anything. So the only heating was the fire in the lounge, and she used to put that in front of the fire, fill it up slowly with hot water, and that was my bath time until I was 10. My sister joined me 4.5 years later, and we both used to share the bath because obviously water was an issue. It was difficult emptying an old tin bath as well. So this wasn't a nightly event. I think it was, from memory, more sort of perhaps twice a week if we were lucky. My grandparents, who lived in Cheshire, would come over and spend 2 weeks holiday in the summer and would come over and spend Christmases with us. How my mother managed with a 2-ring baby belling stove with an oven and this little 2 rings on top to do a beautiful Christmas dinner, as far as I remember. It might not be what I remember, perhaps it was quite basic. It was a very, very thriving tourist industry in Rowen. There were 2 cafes here. One was the Rowen Tea Gardens, and we would have coaches come and visit, park at the bottom of the village. People would walk up and see this beautiful village, and a little bit further up, the Willow Cafe, and stop and have afternoon tea and really enjoy it. And we had postcards sold at the bottom shop, and the other shop slightly further up, which was across from the chapel, where people would buy postcards and say they'd visited this beautiful little village called Rowen. Rowen Carnival once a year, that was a big event because people would get their farm trailers out and they would decorate the trailers, and people would have a theme like cowboys and Indians or Roman soldiers or 60s outfit girls, you know, singing, whatever. That was a really big event in the village, and they would crown a local queen who would come from any of the villages around Pemamar, Llanfyddechan, Lleisiau'r. And then we had hullabaloos in the village. That was a huge thing, that people who could play an instrument. My father could play the mandolin and played the clarinet. We would all gather around a big campfire and have a sing-song, and that would bring the community together.
Uncle Merv decided that riding holidays would be the thing. He had 2 young daughters. That was very spectacular because we came right along the top of the Carneddau. With Snowdon sort of north of us, there is a track actually you can get off and then you climb up onto the top, more or less, at the beginning, and then you keep going up and down all the way back. Actually, we came back to Rowen. Very lovely nights in pubs, but they had to have stables, see, because we had each person had a horse. They all had rather posh ponies and thoroughbreds, because 2 other friends of his came and they were hunters, and I had this really solid looking Welsh cob. You know, if you're horsey, it wasn't in the same class really, but it was the best ride over the top because we got into bog. The beautiful thoroughbreds had little tiny aristocratic feet and the cobs have lovely big feet, spreading their weight evenly and able to get out. We had no problem with the bogginess and the marshes, just went plodding on. My aunt, who was living in Rowen, about outside Rowen and Gilbach, had died. She was in the ATS and she came out in 1945. She decided that she wanted to come back to the Conwy Valley because she knew it and loved it from her childhood. When she looked at Gilbach, she asked my father to go with her to the sale because she was very nervous about bidding. And as it turned out, the bidding was very competitive. There was a man who was very, very determined to buy Gilbach. And I remember my father coming home saying he'd been back to Denby where we were living. coming back home and saying, oh, it was terrible, it was terrible. And she just kept saying to me, go on, keep bidding. And it got to £7,000 for the house and 20 acres. And that was a lot of money then, in 1945. It's not big, you see, but it was enough to do what she wanted to do. And she had a wonderful helper, Tom Jones, who was lived in Tinnergrace, and he'd always worked there with the previous previous owners. So he was very familiar with things, and she had always been able to drive, which was quite unusual for that generation. And so in the army, in the ATS, she'd had to drive lorries.
Before I retired, I was Professor of Animal Science in the University of Aberdeen. But I'd always wanted to farm because my first degree was in agriculture. But I had to wait till I was 60 before I could start farming. And then we inherited this farm here. The land had been let to our neighbours. We took it back and we farmed with cattle and sheep. We had pedigree Charolais cattle here, and we farmed for about 18 years, and then we retired again. I got to the age when I felt I should no longer be training Charolais bulls to walk on a halter.
The garden is positioned with a very, very, very good view of the Conwy Valley and the river. When you stand in our garden, you don't see anything actually in the way of habitation. There's a farm below, and there's a hill with a house on it, and then there's Trwy, and in the distance we see the lights at night of Llanrwst. But actually the view, the valley is just empty.
I moved from quite a large school in England and to a decrepit-seeming 300-year-old Welsh cottage, kind of up on the hills, up above Rowen with me and my sister and my parents. So moving from about 40 miles outside of London, where we could just go into London on the train, you know, and it was 40 minutes away. And we moved up here, and my first memory basically is of driving up. We had the car full of guinea pigs and a trailer full of chickens and all these, because we always had chickens all my life. And then we went up this tiny narrow lane, and it's such, Ynysgorch is quite a steep hill as well, especially when you're used to the south of England. The hedges were towering over because it was, I don't know, August or so, and the hedges hadn't been cut yet. So it felt like, almost like going up a tunnel, and then to this kind of freezing cold house, 300-year-old stone kind of longhouse, Inglenut cottage on the hillside, and the old family was still there. So one of the rooms was full of boxes. One of the rooms we were convinced was haunted. We had to sleep in there overnight. And it felt like a kind of completely wild wilderness. We used to go to the bottom shop. It's Grocer of the Royal Stores, but everyone called it the bottom shop. We used to go there for penny sweets. There was this lovely tray of penny sweets and this cat that used to sit on top of the sweets, which was rather amazing. Nobody really seemed to mind the cat sitting on the sweets. It was just, you know, why not? It was a very crowded little shop with kind of everything up in front of the window and loads of stuff behind the till, and all the kind of kids trying to crowd in there after school. Most of my childhood though was basically kind of up on the hill, just inside the edge of the national park. And my sister and I used to kind of go exploring up and down the stream. We had permission from the local farmers to kind of go into their fields and things. So we kind of name places, like we named Hadrian's Wall and Niagara Falls and all of these kind of things. My kind of reading fodder, I suppose, growing up was things like Swallows and Amazons, and in Swallows and Amazons they always named places. You know, they had the Peak of Darien, and so I think we were kind of following that basically. So Niagara Falls was a it's about 6 foot high waterfall, which didn't have much water in it in the summer and, you know, a bit more in the winter, so it wasn't exactly Niagara. And then we used to go up the stream, and there's an old fulling mill up there, completely ruined, and it had a little kind of square hole through from the wall, and we used to be able to crawl through that into the stream and crawl back again and things. And then a little bit further up again, there's a place which we called HV, because my dad used to abbreviate everything. So like I was A instead of Anna, and the cat was SP because he was Sundance Pussy and things like that. So we called this place HV because it was Hidden Valley. And it had this kind of massive rock kind of covered in about, 4 inches of moss. And there was another rock which we sheltered under once in a snowstorm. And I think a couple of weeks later we came up and the rock had collapsed. So it's a good thing we weren't underneath it then. We were just kind of exploring. I mean, there were places where you could follow the stream for a long way, and there were lots of fields that we were basically allowed in because the farmer said we could, and there were other ones we weren't quite sure about, but the trees would come over the stream, so you could kind of sneak down the path of the stream. And then there's these old bridges, where the lane goes over, and they're just made out of these kind of slabs of stone, basically, that you can't tell from above. I think we tried to build a tree house, but that never really worked. But I mean, we didn't really need to kind of build anything or kind of take anything with us, because, crawling through the bracken and climbing up and down the stream and things, it was enough, really, You didn't need anything else. I don't know if you'd call it lonely or not, because I didn't really mind just kind of being me and my sister. And then after a couple of years, some kids moved in down the road. So I had a friend that we'd kind of cycle up and down the road to see, and I spent, half my time at her house, and she spent half her time at our house, and we did kind of stuff. They had quite a lot of land, so they had a pond dug out in the field that we used to swim in, and there was an old scout hut. So the Rowen scout hut was on their land. I don't know how long it had been in disuse for, but it was basically a wreck. So we decided that we'd do that up, and we started painting it and trying to make it kind of nice. It never actually got nice, and then we gave up. But it was fun while it lasted. I do remember once there's a field belonging to our neighbour, and it used to have massive mushrooms in it. For some reason, they were kind of like about that big across. But then you'd pick them up and they'd be full of maggots, which was quite unpleasant, because we used to go kind of picking mushrooms sometimes, and you'd find these and you think, wow, that's amazing, that's a brilliant mushroom, and then it was just horrendous. And then I kind of heard a noise and looked round, and there must have been about 20 rams. It was like one of these Wild West films, when the enemy are ranged along the cliff. I don't know if they were all rams, but they certainly seemed like they were all rams, and they all had horns, and they chased us the whole length of the field, and we basically kind of ducked underneath underneath where the trees come over the stream, and hid in the stream and kind of crawled away that way. That was a scary memory.
Ges i'n magu fo nain y taid ar ei magu fi mewn bod. Ac o taid gwisgo Myrchlyn fatha cowman efo gwarthag de, ffarm gwarthag a ffarm defaid o'n bigal na wed, Ifor o'r bigal. Oedd o'n byw drws esa, o'r dau dyn mynd efo'r ffarm de. Oedd chi'n byw gwisgo ar y ffarm, oedd chi'n byw yn y tŷ. Efo taid o'n i ges i fagu. O'n i'n dechrau gwisgo Myrchlyn, bod ni'n dyn ag oed. Efo gwarthag de, gwrdd mi weithio, efo gwarthag oedd o, ddim defaid, ti'n gwarthag de. Bystych de. Elpio allan efo cnifio de. Bod y gwarthag, o'n i fwy am byd adre, efo bystych de. O, ffidio, glai glad nhw, allu ffidio na. A cadw troia wedyn, cadw troia de. Troia bach, bach grinna de, ar adlewyrchiadau de. So, is i'n ffarm o trin 20 oed, oedd yn ffarmwr warw do, a'r mam, a'i fam werthu'r lle i gyd o, so Myrchlyn i mynd o'n. Jo'n y territoriol rhannu wedyn, bod ni'n tuer 20 oed falle, wbeth arall i'n neud. Ac ys i wedi sartiant o'na, a wedyn, o'n o Welsh 3000s, res Welsh 3000, cochwyn y ben y wyddfa, a gorffan y drym, de. So, 26 miles as the crow flies, 26 miles. Climio bob pig dros 10,000 feet on. Fyny i lawr. So ni ddim ond 8 awr a 4 munud. Ac ew 8 awr a 38 o'r amser. A so ni basio'r gyrcys yn ogwen. So ni ffit, gweld, o'n bita reis yn yr afon o'n nhw. Sy'n nes i ddechrau, bod ni ta 14, i bysgota na efo Uncle Vic, a bysgota afon wen ac afon goch. Lle oedd traws bach, yna nes i ddechrau. A cerad yn rot law i fyny, glychu domon dail. O'n Carneddau, er o'n dilyn ffwrna de, i glia ffwrna gyd. Dechrau mi o'n i Carneddau, bod ni'n mewn ti'r rescue yna. So ni'n nabod i wedi. Gwysod ni'n rescue ni'n hogia, ni'n Billy Golston ar gyd goch o hwnna waith beth, so ni'n nabod oedd yna. Lot o'n i llaw ar gyda'r fan. A glydyr fawr, glydyr fach, garn ffwrna. Ochr yma, yn bach cael am pan yr Rowen ffwrna ar Dafydd. Gyson ni'n ar Dafydd yn ymwneud, boed i marw, just cael heart attack oedd yn marw. A'i ffrindiwyd lawr i Llanbedr, i alw rescue team. Ac yn i'n ola, ac yna blisfon yn ei, Tom Long yn yno. Jam mawr. A pan yn mynd i fyny i'w sigar i gwyn codi fo, ac ar yw'r draws yn mynd i fyna. Mae'n chwsig yn mynd e. A bod ni'n byw yn Conwy, oedd y plisfon noc y drws. Ta un gloch yn bora. Ac o mam o'n gwrdd yn byw na. Is y plisfon yn dod, yes, all right, I know what it is.
Nes i fad ar ysgol pan o'n i'n 40. Ac mynd i Farchwel, tal y bont i weithio efo ewyr sy'n mi. Brawd yn had yn ffarmio yna. A fan o fys i am 4 blynedd yn gweithio efo cyffyla. Oedd o'n tractor di cyrraedd ag yna, ynde. Efo gwedd y ffyla, oedd hi'n troi i cua yna i gyd a bob peth efo cyffyla, de. Oedd na neb yn efo car na'n byd adeg hynny, na fan. A fan o fys i am 4 blynedd, oedd yn mrawd i'r armi, a wedyn nes i adra. Ac yn parcio i bod ys hynny, tan roedd y mab, Dewi, i gymryd drosodd, pen o'n i'n 70, ie. Ac dwi'n cofio mynd ar ceffil dwytha, ar dren o Talcam. Oedden ni'n joinio tren o Sir Fôn. Ac o'n tua 30 neu 40 cyffyla ni. Mynd i'r sel yn Abergela. Dwi'n meddwl bod y cwbl yn mynd i cael ei lladd. Mynd i Ffrainc. 1947, dwi'n meddwl. A wedyn pawb yn gwerthu cyffyla yn dod. Oedd yn ddwrnod trist ofnadwy. Ofnadwy gweld yr holl cyffyla yma'n mynd. Ni wedi bod yn gweithio'n galad a dweud y gwir. Ie. Wedyn tractor, oedd bob peth wedyn, ffyrgu bach, ie. Ie, un stori bach, o'n i'n cofio, pen i farch o'n blwyddyn o'n i wedi bod yna. A mae'n dweud, mae'r hwch ma, eisiau mynd at y bai. A mae'n gwybod ffordd, mae wedi bod yna o blaen, mae'n dweud, eisiau ar ei hôl i. Just cyrraedd ar ei hôl i, mae'n dweud. A mi gerdys i o Talbont, dros bont Dolgarog, a draw at Mynanabu, ac i fyny, troi fyny at Mynanabu, ac o'n i'n gwybod ffordd i fanno. O'n dibynnu ar yr hwch wedyn, a mi droth i ffordd rong. Ys i atryw ffarmwr yn cael, mae'n gwyddi, lle mae'r bai yma o ti'n mynd ffordd rong, mae'n dweud. Ddim o fi sy'n mynd ffordd rong, o blydi hwch ma sy'n mynd ffordd rong o fi. Ac ys i nôl am i, anyway, gath i'r bai yn diwedd o. A wedyn dwi wedi hel y mynyddoedd yma i gyd. bob un mynydd o Rowen, o Talafan yma, i Capacerig. Wedi hel bob un mynydd efo adag cneifio ac adag tynnu rwyn a falle. I fyny i Môl Siabod de. Fy sy'n mynd i fyny Môl Siabod am 36 mlynedd nel yna. So bob blwyddyn, 3 neu 4 gwaith y blwyddyn de. Ie, na, do. Fy sy'n mae le braf iawn.
Once I think I began to make friends at school, that life became a little easier. And my newfound local friends could take me to places to explore. And this meant going a little bit further afield than the town itself. Guffin, for instance, very, very short distance away, had a watermill and a pond, the mill pond, to explore. Beyond it, across the stream, was Beneth Woods. And Beneth Woods was out of bounds and was patrolled by a gamekeeper who used to fire his gun in the air to frighten people off. And beside Beneth Woods, no longer there, Fitton's Farm. And Fitton's Farm was mostly fruit, gooseberries, strawberries, apples and the like. And what a delight as a small boy to go on your Saturday morning and work in the fields, pick fruit. And they actually paid, I think it was 2 shillings for a full basket of fruit. On day one, I was given the job of picking strawberries. Strawberries, I mean, I don't think you've seen strawberries in a bowl with carnation milk on, and suddenly you're in a field of them. So it was one for the farmer, one for me, one for the farmer, one for me. But about the first hour, and then I was violently sick. Didn't touch strawberries for a long time afterwards. And then my friends, my immediate friends who I became good pals with at school came from farming communities in the slightly outlying towns. Rowen, Tynegroes, and I was invited to come up onto the farms. One that I remember well was at Gorse Hill. Gorse Hill is now a caravan site, but it was a working farm in those days. And probably one of the most vivid memories I have from that time was haymaking in the summer. And the farmer's wife producing wonderful meals, bacon sandwiches with thick as doorsteps, keep the troops well fed, and exploring the fields and the streams and the trees, getting to know the wildlife and the flora and the fauna. And this was the beginning of a love of the countryside, and more deeply a respect for the countryside. In lambing time, to see lambs being born and brought into the world, the concept and idea of new life, regeneration. My friends just took this in every day. It was part of the way of life. Looking for eggs in the morning for breakfast, in the hedgerows next door to the farm or in the skibbo. It's a wonderful experience to have as a young man. And then the absolute joy of being able to try driving the tractor. It was the first motorised vehicle I ever touched, was a little Massey 7, one of those little grey Masseys. It was a wonderful experience. After about 3/4 of an hour, I got so proficient, the farmer's son went off to the farm to get some, wherever it was, to bring out to us. So I'm a little bit over-enthusiastic, found that you could shift the gear into second gear and it'd go faster, which was okay, except it was pulling a scythe and cutters. And by the time he came back, I'd done the whole field and was parked in the centre, full of jubilation, which lasted for all of about 30 seconds till it was pointed out that the cutters had jammed and all I'd done is flatten the whole field. But it was the beginning of motorised transport. Sachnant Pass is not far away. What exploration, this echo rock where you could stand there and shout, hello, and it'd come back to you across the rocks. The mountain itself, but Penmine Head, where you could climb it to the top and look out across the bay. Wonderful. And consider that I'm still comparing this in my juvenile young mind with the sights of factories and industry and traffic in urban London. What a comparison. What a marvellous place to be.
I took the castle and the walls and things for granted, and every now and then I think, wow, I grew up in a place with a castle and town walls. You know, I still have to remind myself sometimes that that's not what everybody does. Our house was towards the end of St Agnes Road, so you looked up to the mountains, particularly Talavan, but the other mountains too. There was a field that was raised up behind us, an oak tree. I spent a lot of time at this oak tree, and I used to look up at the mountains and sort of daydream quite a lot. And we lived in Conwy till about 1960. And then we moved over the river to Llangystennin. And I still had the same view of the Carneddau, which to the extent that when I went off to university, I could draw the skyline from memory. Just going down the quay was fun. And my mum, I can't remember how old we were, but I said when my mum was shopping, me and my brother, she'd leave us on the quay, a bit of beach there. And there'd be boats tied up at the end of the jetty. And we used to go down and sit in them and sort of push out. I mean, they were tied, push out and pretend we were sailing. And there'd be boats, sometimes upright ones, pulled up on the shingle. And we used to rock those until usually a woman would come out of one of the cottages there and yell at us and we'd stop. Mr Hughes had 8 milking cows and about 30 sheep. So Babs, who lived quite close, sort of just round the corner, she started helping. And when I got up early enough, I used to help. Because he had a milk round, so we used to, after the cows had been milked, it all went through a cooler. And we'd bottle the milk for about 8 houses and go take it round and collect the milk bottles and bring them back and wash them in the kitchen. So we did actually, you know, we were working, and I think that was the things that was nice. And then we'd be sent off to get the cows in when they were out or count the sheep. But after that, we more or less could do anything we wanted on the farm. Another thing we did to help, which was hard work, is when the threshing machine came round, there was like a sink bath underneath that collected chaff or something like that. I think that's what it was. It was our job when that was full to dive in underneath and pull it out and go and empty it somewhere. So I remember doing that all day and then wondering the next day where my eyelids, I couldn't open my eyes. I must have had a bit of hay fever. But, you know, there's nothing like this now, is there? We saw the end of an era, really. The honey and the seed fairs, which were twice a year, were held in Castle Street in Conwy. Now, when I first moved to Conwy, there wasn't a one-way system in Conwy at all. And when the honey or seed fairs were on, they had to make it two-way down Rose Hill Street. Now, Conwy, even then, there'd be traffic jams, so I think it was quite chaotic. But it was fabulous.
I'd bought some honey in Conwy at the honey fair and decided I could keep bees. I bought some bees from Ellen Morley in Conwy, put the hives in the garden. I got stung, the neighbours got stung, and people walking up to the youth hostel got chased up the hill. So I soon moved them away to a field nearby at Mae'r. And in 1979, my second year of beekeeping, I'd gone up from 2 hives to 8 hives, and I started moving beehives up to the heather on the Carneddau. It was quite a difficult journey to get them up there, but I took them up there every August for 3 years. They would fly out to the Ling Heather and get good crops of honey. The heather has a very strong scent. If you walk across Conwy Mountain, when the heather's in flower, you can smell the scent of the nectar quite noticeably, and that's the scent that gets into the honey. I think I have the longest queues at the honey fair. Maybe it's because I've been involved with it for so long, and people see a queue and they think, oh, this must be good, so they join it. But we all sell well. The honey fair dates back over 700 years to when Conwy was founded by King Edward I. Part of the Royal Charter was that on special days of the year, local people could come into the walled town to trade. For the rest of the year, they were forbidden to meet in groups in Conwy, or to engage in trade. But on the 13th of September, we were allowed to hold a honey fair. Now, this is going back 700 years. And on the 26th of March, we were allowed to hold a seed fair. And I thought, we've got to get this honey fair up and running. I thought, nobody else will do it, it'll just fizzle out. And the deal was, if there was ever a year without a stall, the fairs would stop. And that had happened to numerous other fairs. So in 1990, I publicised it. This was before the days of the internet. And we got a lot of stalls there, a lot of interest, and it was up and running again. There's a guy called Bill who comes from Carnarvon. We learned after one of the events that he buys a jar of honey off everybody who has a stall. And he used to save all his 50p pieces to have enough, because he eats a jar of honey a week. I don't know how anyone can do that, but he likes our honey. And I guess the honey we're producing now is probably much the same as was being produced in Ebba the first time. He timed the fairs right. In the valley here, we've got crocuses, snowdrops, dandelions, hazel, willow, all producing pollen and nectar in the spring when the beehive is building its population. Some of it's down to the skill of the beekeeper, and most of it's down to the weather.
Well, I maintain God and the bees between them know what they're doing, so I never did anything apart from top off the hive. Oh, there's enough room, put it back on again. And they said, what sort of honey is this? And I said, bees. And people really liked it. But just to go and look at bees is a pleasure on a fine morning.
My memories of Rowen are amazing because it was such a lovely place to grow up and live. But also, my father's memories are ingrained in my memory. One of the first things that I remember him telling me was his introduction to Rowen. When he got married in 1952, he lived in Penrhyn Bay, and my parents then moved out of the family home and were looking for a property. He had two choices. One was a mobile home in Conwy, and the other was a village property that was advertised in Rowen. So he brought my mother on his Royal Enfield motorbike. They saw the cottage, opened the front door, the chap was there to welcome them, roaring fire in the fireplace. Roof was collapsing, but who cared? It was a better bet, he thought, than a mobile home. And he often said to me, Wendy, I just don't know how I ended up in such a glorious place, but this is my forever home, and I love it. He worked for the post office as a telecommunications engineer. He went on then to be offered a job, because he was into radio astronomy at the time, at Jodrell Bank. So for a year, they took a year out and went to live in Cheshire with my mother's parents. And he set up radio astronomy and the big disc at Jodrell Bank, worked with Sir Bernard Lovell, was offered a job to stay there, but decided that he had a little child and another one on the way, too expensive to live in Cheshire, that they'd move back to Rowen. Obviously, he was still interested in astronomy. This was his big hobby. And he went on to make his own amateur sort of recording equipment to track the Aurora Borealis. At the time in the early 60s, I think there was a lot of sunspot activity. He made what to me looked like just an old aerial that you would have to collect, you know, your TV broadcasts and things. So it was on top of our garage roof, and in the morning would track the sun. And physically, my mother or anybody who was around at the time, every now and again when we remembered, would have to turn it to follow the sun, so that in his little shed, he could record on little reels of paper, which were then sent to Edinburgh University for them to read it and see where these flares happened, and then you get the aurora. My father had a big astronomical camera, huge thing, but would only take black and white photographs. So we had lots of black and white, lovely photographs of the aurora because we had amazing ones in the 60s. My father used to run a little cinema up at the old Memorial Hall in Rowen. He used to beg, steal and borrow from places like Shell, who produced some really good travel log things at the time, obviously promoting Shell petrol, but at the same time they used to do tours of Britain, historical houses that they'd visit, and produce other films. The other big hit, of course, was that he would love cartoons and would show and hire things like Woody Woodpecker. A lot of the adults that are my age in the village would keep saying, before my dad died, I wish he'd do another one of his film shows because Woody Woodpecker will forever stay in my memory as a Friday night special after school. So it would be a monthly thing. They'd stop for the interval for a bit of tea and cake. My mum would bake cakes and provide those, and then get on to the main feature. The biggest main feature that they ever had was a film called Sword in the Stone. Jet Yates, who worked for Yorkshire Television at the time, managed, and I still don't know how, to sneak out the film which had been sent to Yorkshire Television to do a little snippet on a programme showing the top 10 Disney films over the years, and this was going to be their new film. So he brought home the reels on the Friday night. My dad showed it at the hall. It was the biggest sellout. When I say sellout, I can't even remember if people paid, or if they did, it would have been a very minimal amount to attend. And he was the biggest hero because it hadn't even come out in the cinema. To this day, remains one of my favourite Disney films just because of the memory. And of course, if a film split halfway through, my dad would have to quickly stop it before the bulb burnt out any more film that was going round, mend it, splice it together. We'd have boos from the audience and then continue rolling.
Greigan fawr yn de. Nath aeroplan syth I graig eich ben y llyn do. A da gryfel do. O'na aeroplan dod lawr o'i ras I fyny do. Amal yn dod lawr yn dilyn de.
My father loved walking the Carneddau range, and he was always proud that we lived on the foot of the first mountain in the Carneddau range. He'd come across aircraft crash sites up there. He does remember one in 1959 that crashed on Talavan, and I think this is probably what whetted his appetite. He then started to do research and found that there weren't just one or two crash sites up there, so he went on to write 6 books. His first book was published in 1985. There were a few survivors still, and if he contacted them, a lot of them wanted to travel from New Zealand or Australia or America, visit him and ask him to take them to the crash site because they didn't know where they'd crashed.
A glwad y glec mawr yma. Ond nes I meddwl yn byd, o'n i'n meddwl na y barier, torri'r barier oedd yna, a si adra. Ac oedd yna beth ar y teli bod yna aeroplan y missing yn Sodonia. Os o rhywun yn gwybod neu di clywed rhywbeth, nes I ffonio polis. Wedyn nes I lawr I Conwy efo Mountain Rescue ac I fyny. Ond oedd hi'n dwydd ofnadwy. Oedd hi'n o'i niwl ac yn eira. A wedyn ddari o ganslo fo. O'r rhy berig, o'n y hogia ifink yn y fo, ynde. Gyn y boi RAF oedd o. Ar o'r gorau noson o si adra, de. A wedyn wnaethon nhw reid teams o bob man, wedyn ni chwilio amdano nhw. Fuon nhw tua 3 diwrnod cyn gyda nhw hyddi, de. Oedd I niwl bob dydd, de. Reit ar dop gan all Llywelyn oedd hi. Ia, dim yn syth i'r mynydd, ia. Ia, oedd 45, toedd ddim yn fawr, 45 wedi lladd yna, ia. Och, ydyn nhw'n chans.
At the time when the war started in 1939, there was no body to rescue anybody who crashed up on the mountains. And so it would be the local bobby who would organise farmers or anyone who could come and lend a hand to go and find out where the wreckage was and if there were any survivors. So 1943-ish, they started thinking that they should do something about this. And a lot of it was obviously set up because some people wanted to do mountaineering and climbed Everest, and they were connected through Capel and the mountaineering schools up there. They thought, yeah, we can do this and get together as a group. And it went on from there to form the mountain rescue team.
We started going to Ysgol Rowen, which had 16 pupils at that point, which was a bit of a culture shock after going to a school with about 200 pupils in it, I think. And my sister was crushed because she couldn't learn violin anymore, and suddenly we had to learn Welsh, which was another bit of a shock. I grew up with little bits of Welsh from my mum, but not anything kind of, it was Nos Da and Nos Da Ychafi and things like that. And suddenly everything was kind of bilingual. And we were in this tiny little school. There was only me and one other boy in my class. So our class was just basically a desk. It was me and Wyn. There was nobody in the year below me. So I didn't really have any kind of peers of my own age, which is a bit of a shock again after being in a class of about, 10, 15 people with lots of friends and things. So all my friends were a couple of years younger than me.
Oedden ni'n cerdded lawr i'r ysgol ac, yn y dechrau, doedd na ddim car na ddim byd ac wedyn oedden cerdded oedden ni am pan gaethon ni rhyw gar bas oedd hi'n lyb iawn. Basa un amrodyr yn dod lawr i wedyn i nôl i o'r ysgol. Wedyn efo bus wedyn i fynd i Llarws, dyna bus yn mynd â ni i'r ysgol ramadeg yn Llarws. Ac adra wedyn, cerdded adra wedyn, chi o'na.
Road safety's changed because the kids went through a phase of the cars driving off down the road, taking them back from school, and they'd be like lying on the bonnets and things like that, or other ones just in the back of the pickups and stuff. But I can't imagine anybody doing that now.
A wedyn, fel oedd y plant yn mynd yn hun, oedd yr rhifau mynd i lawr yn dod a doedd ddim plant newydd yn dod i'r unig bobl yn dal i fyw yma adag ynny. A dim plant newydd yn dod a wedyn mi oedd yr rhifau lawr erbyn yr ail enaf. Wnaethon ni baffio i gadw'r ysgol yn gorad pan oedd hi ryw 6 oed i 8. Yna 2 ysgol adag ynny, 2 ysgol adag ynny. Un ochr ac yn Arfon ffynna wedi. Ac nathon nhw benderfynu y cae hon a cadw'r llall. Dwi'n cofio llond bus yna ni'n mynd i Gynarfon i brotestio bod ti'n cae. Do, wnaethon ni a cofio gorfod gwneud cyweliad ar y teledu ac ni. Achos o'n i'n ysgrifennyddus PTA lladd ag ynny. Wel, gynna ni'n PTA, wnaethon ni ddechrau cael pwyllgor i gadw'r ysgol yn gorad. Nath Trwy ddeithon ni bo eisiau ailbaffio, wnaethon ni ailbaffio a medru chadw'n gorad. A mi rosodd yn gorad am mi ddoth na deulu efo 5 o blant. Cofio pan oedden ni'n paffio am yr gadw'r ysgol yn gorad. Mi ddoth na deulu fyw i Teicha uwch ben Rowen efo 5 o blant. Wel, oedd hynna yn andros o ddau ni'n doedd, a wedyn hwnna rhywun neu 2 deuluoedd eraill. Mi wnaethon ni wedi codi'r cyfri adag ynny i ta 15 o blant. Mi gadwodd hwnna'r ysgol i fynd am ta 10 mlynedd beth bynnag wedyn neu fwy, mae'n siŵr gen i.